I stared at the empty lot where my house used to be, the sold sign mocking me from what was once my front yard. 15 months of deployment in Iraq, saving every dollar I could, and I come home to find my parents had sold the house I bought with my own money while I was serving overseas. The betrayal cut deeper than any roadside bomb I'd dodged in Baghdad. But here's the thing about military training: it teaches you patience, strategy, and how to execute a mission with precision. My parents were about to learn that lesson the hard way when I froze their entire retirement fund and watched 30 years of their financial planning disappear with a single phone call. If you've ever trusted someone completely only to have them stab you in the back when you were most vulnerable, this story is going to hit home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jake Thompson, and I'm 29 years old now, but this story really begins when I was 18 and shipping out to Fort Bragg for basic training. Growing up in the Benson district of Omaha, Nebraska, our family looked like the American dream from the outside. Two-story colonial house with white picket fence, dad running his own tax preparation business, mom helping with the books, and two sons who were supposed to follow in their entrepreneurial footsteps. Bob and Susan Thompson had built Thompson Tax Services from nothing, starting in our basement in 1995 and eventually moving to a small office in a strip mall on Dodge Street. My younger brother Tyler was everything my parents wanted in a son. He was studying business at the University of Nebraska, planning to modernize their tax service with digital marketing and expanded services. Tyler had inherited dad's head for numbers and mom's gift for dealing with difficult clients. He was the golden child who would carry on the family legacy and probably expand it beyond their wildest dreams. Then there was me, the son who wanted to serve his country instead of serving tax returns. The tension started early in high school when I began talking about military service. Dad would shake his head over dinner, cutting into his pot roast with more force than necessary. "The military is a dead end, Jake. You'll spend 4 years taking orders, come back with nothing to show for it, and then what? You'll be behind Tyler by 4 years in real life." Mom would nod along, adding her own concerns about danger and being so far from home. They painted my desire to serve as youthful rebellion that I'd eventually outgrow, like wanting to be a firefighter or astronaut. But their disappointment ran deeper than career concerns. They saw my choice as a rejection of everything they'd worked to build. "We've created something here," Dad would say during our more heated discussions. "A business, a reputation, a future for both of you boys. And you want to throw it away to march around in the desert." The words stung because they came from a place of genuine hurt, but they also revealed how little my parents understood what drove me. Tyler, to his credit, never openly sided with them during these family meetings, but his silence spoke volumes. He was comfortable being the favored son, the one whose choices made sense to our parents. I couldn't blame him for that, but it created a distance between us that would only grow over the years. While Tyler learned QuickBooks and tax law, I was reading about military history and physical fitness. While he networked with local business owners, I was talking to recruiters and veterans about what military service really meant. The day I enlisted was one of the worst in our family's history. Mom cried for 3 hours straight, Dad didn't speak to me for a week, and Tyler seemed genuinely confused about why I'd choose uncertainty over the security they were offering. "You could have anything you wanted here," Mom sobbed at the dinner table. "Your own office, profit sharing, a guaranteed future. Why would you choose to leave all of that behind?" The question haunted me because part of me wondered the same thing, but I knew that staying meant becoming someone I wasn't meant to be. Basic training at Fort Bragg was everything I'd hoped for and harder than I'd imagined. The physical challenges pushed me beyond what I thought possible, but it was the mental transformation that surprised me most. For the first time in my life, I was valued for qualities my parents had never appreciated. My drill instructors praised my attention to detail, my ability to stay calm under pressure, and my natural leadership when working with struggling soldiers. The Jake Thompson who emerged from basic training was confident, capable, and finally comfortable in his own skin. My military occupational specialty became information technology specialist, a field that combined my technical aptitude with the military's cutting-edge cybersecurity needs. The training was intensive, covering everything from network administration to digital forensics, and I discovered a passion for protecting critical information systems. My parents grudgingly admitted that the technical skills might be valuable, but they still saw my military service as an expensive detour from real life. During my first leave home, the tension was palpable. Dad peppered me with questions about my exit strategy, when I'd be ready to come home and join the business. Mom worried constantly about deployment rumors she'd heard on the news. Tyler had flourished in my absence, implementing new software systems and bringing in several major commercial clients. The family business was thriving without me, which should have been good news but somehow felt like confirmation that I'd never really been needed. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I announced that I was planning to buy a house before my inevitable deployment, using the money I'd saved during my training period. The idea was both practical and symbolic. I needed somewhere to live during my stateside assignments, but I also wanted to prove that military service could lead to real financial stability. My parents were skeptical but not entirely opposed, especially when I explained that the house would be an investment that could appreciate while I was overseas. The house hunting process revealed how much I'd changed during my military service. While my parents focused on neighborhoods that would be convenient to their business, I was looking for something I could truly call my own. The house I found at 1247 Maple Street was perfect for my needs, a modest ranch-style home built in 1978, with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a small backyard where I could work on my fitness routine during leave periods. At $145,000, it was well within my budget, and the neighborhood was solid middle class with good potential for appreciation. The mortgage process was surprisingly smooth for a young soldier. My steady military income, excellent credit, and substantial down payment made me an attractive candidate for lenders. I remember the pride I felt signing those papers, knowing that at 22 years old, I owned something substantial that I'd earned through my own hard work and sacrifice. My parents attended the closing, and while they didn't share my enthusiasm, they seemed to respect that I was making responsible financial decisions. But here's where I made the critical mistake that would haunt me for the next 2 years. As a young soldier facing deployment, I needed someone to handle emergencies and basic maintenance while I was overseas. My parents volunteered, insisting that it made practical sense.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Since they lived nearby and had experience managing properties through their business. Dad's tax clients included several landlords, so he understood the basics of property management, maintenance scheduling, and tenant relations. Against every instinct I'd developed during military training about maintaining operational security and limiting access to critical assets, I added my parents as authorized agents on my property management account. This gave them the ability to handle repairs, emergencies, and even tenant issues if I decided to rent out the house during deployment. The paperwork was extensive, but my parents assured me it was standard practice for military families. "You can't manage a property from Iraq," Dad explained logically. "We'll take care of everything here so you can focus on your mission." The decision felt responsible and mature at the time. I was demonstrating trust in my family while ensuring my investment would be protected during my absence. Mom seemed genuinely touched that I was relying on them, and Dad approached the responsibility with the same meticulous attention he brought to his tax preparation work. Tyler offered to help with any technical issues or online management tasks, making it feel like a true family effort to support my military service. 3 months later, I received my deployment orders 15 months in Iraq with the 82nd Airborne Division, assigned to Joint Base Baghdad for cybersecurity operations. The mission was both challenging and crucial, involving protection of communication networks and intelligence systems that kept American forces safe throughout the region. It was exactly the kind of meaningful service I'd joined the military to provide, and I felt honored to be selected for such a critical assignment. The deployment preparation period was intense, involving specialized training, equipment checks, and the emotional challenge of saying goodbye to everyone I cared about. My parents seemed genuinely worried about my safety, which was both touching and frustrating. They'd never fully understood my choice to serve, but faced with the reality of deployment to a combat zone, their parental instincts overrode their disappointment about my career path. Our final family dinner before deployment was surprisingly emotional. Dad, who rarely showed vulnerability, actually got choked up talking about how proud he was of my dedication and professionalism. Mom made all my favorite foods, and spent the evening fussing over details like whether I had enough socks and toiletries. Tyler gave me a high-end laptop bag, and promised to send care packages regularly. For the first time in years, we felt like a unified family working together toward a common goal. The conversation about the house came up naturally during that dinner. I explained that I planned to leave it empty rather than deal with tenant issues from overseas, and my parents assured me they'd check on it regularly, handle any maintenance needs, and keep the yard maintained. Dad had already arranged for a neighbor, Mrs. Patricia Williams, to keep an eye on things and call him if she noticed any problems. The arrangements felt thorough and responsible, giving me peace of mind as I prepared to focus entirely on my mission overseas. Joint Base Baghdad was a different world from anything I'd experienced during stateside training. The base housed thousands of American personnel supporting operations throughout Iraq, and the Cybersecurity Operations Center where I worked ran 24 hours a day, protecting critical communications and intelligence networks. The work was fascinating and vital, involving constant monitoring for intrusion attempts, maintaining secure communications between forward operating bases, and analyzing potential cyber threats from hostile actors. The days blended together in a rhythm of 12-hour shifts, physical training, equipment maintenance, and the occasional video call home. Communication with family was limited but regular, usually brief conversations focused on general updates about health and safety rather than detailed discussions of daily life. My parents seemed relieved each time we talked, and their reports about the house were consistently positive. Everything was fine, the neighborhood was quiet, and they were handling the basic maintenance exactly as we'd discussed. What I didn't know was that the real estate market in Omaha was experiencing an unprecedented boom during 2021. Property values were rising rapidly due to low interest rates, increased demand from remote workers, and limited housing inventory. Houses in my neighborhood were selling within days of listing, often for significantly more than asking price. My modest ranch house, purchased for $145,000 just 2 years earlier, was now worth nearly $185,000 according to online estimates. 6 months into my deployment, during one of our routine calls, Dad mentioned that several neighbors had been approached by real estate investors looking to buy properties quickly for cash. He framed it as neighborhood gossip, something interesting happening around the area but not directly relevant to our situation. The conversation was brief, as most of our calls were, and I was focused on an upcoming mission that required my full attention. I thanked him for keeping me informed and asked him to continue monitoring the situation. Looking back, that phone call was the beginning of the betrayal that would shatter my trust in my family forever. At the time, I interpreted Dad's comment as helpful information sharing, the kind of local intelligence that responsible property managers provide to absent owners. I had no reason to suspect that he and Mom were already discussing whether this market surge represented an opportunity too good to pass up, regardless of my wishes or legal ownership of the property. The cybersecurity work at Joint Base Baghdad was demanding but rewarding, and I found myself completely absorbed in the mission. Our team was tracking increasingly sophisticated attempts to penetrate military communication networks, and the technical challenges required constant learning and adaptation. I was building expertise that would be valuable in civilian cybersecurity careers while serving my country in a meaningful way. For the first time since joining the military, I felt like I was proving my parents wrong about the practical value of military service. 3 months later, I received an email that changed everything. It came from Mrs. Williams, the neighbor my parents had asked to watch the house. The subject line was simple: concerned about your house. The message itself was devastating. Jake, I hope this email finds you safe. I wasn't sure if you knew, but there are strangers living in your house now. They moved in last week and told me they bought it from your parents 3 months ago. I thought you should know in case there's been some mistake. Please stay safe over there. I read that email 5 times before the words fully registered. Strangers were living in my house. My parents had sold my house, without my permission, while I was deployed, serving my country. The betrayal was so complete and unexpected that I initially wondered if there had been some kind of administrative error or identity theft. But deep down, I knew exactly what had happened, and the knowledge made me physically sick. My first response was to call my parents immediately, despite the time difference and communication restrictions. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again an hour later, then again the next morning during their business hours. Nothing. Finally, after 3 days of unsuccessful attempts to reach them, they called me back. Dad's voice was carefully controlled, the same tone he used when delivering bad news to tax clients about audits or penalties. Jake, we've been meaning to talk to you about the house. He began without any pleasantries or acknowledgement of my frantic attempts to reach them. The market conditions became too good to ignore. Properties in your neighborhood were selling for 40% above what you paid, and we saw an opportunity to maximize your investment return. We sold the house for $185,000 and have the proceeds invested in a diversified portfolio that will generate much better returns than real estate. The calm, rational tone of his explanation was almost as infuriating as the betrayal itself. He was presenting the theft of my house as a favor, a wise financial decision made on my behalf by people who understood markets better than I did. There was no acknowledgement that they'd acted without my permission, no apology for the deception, no recognition that they'd violated my trust in the most fundamental way possible. "You sold my house," I managed to say, my voice barely controlled despite the rage building inside me. "We sold an investment property that was underperforming its potential," Dad corrected. "The real estate market won't stay this hot forever, and we wanted to lock in your gains while they were available. You'll thank us when you see the returns from proper investment management." Mom's voice joined the call at that point, adding her own justification for what they'd done. "We were protecting your interests, honey. You're so far away and couldn't make rational decisions about market timing. We used our business experience to do what was best for your financial future. The money is safe and growing, which is more than we could say about an empty house sitting in Omaha." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, but every word they spoke made the betrayal worse. They had acted deliberately, carefully, and with complete disregard for my ownership rights or personal wishes. They had stolen my house while I was deployed, then invested the proceeds according to their own judgment about what constituted wise financial management. When I demanded specifics about this investment portfolio they'd created with my money, their answers became vague and evasive. Over the following weeks, I used my limited computer access to investigate what had actually happened to my money. What I discovered was even worse than theft. It was fraud. My parents had indeed sold my house for $185,000, but instead of investing the proceeds in any kind of diversified portfolio, they had used the money to pay off debts and expand Thompson Tax Services. Business records I accessed through public databases showed they had purchased new equipment, renovated their office space, and hired 2 additional employees right around the time my house was sold. They had stolen my house to save their business, then lied to me about investing the money for my benefit. The betrayal was complete and calculated, taking advantage of my deployment and limited ability to investigate or respond immediately. They had counted on my military discipline and family loyalty to prevent me from taking action against them, especially while I was serving in a combat zone. Phone calls with Tyler revealed additional disturbing details about the family dynamics I'd been shielded from while overseas. "They've been struggling for a couple of years," he admitted reluctantly when I pressed him for information. "COVID hurt the business more than they let on, and Dad made some bad investments with business funds. They were talking about bankruptcy before you deployed, but then the real estate market exploded, and they saw an opportunity. Did you know they were planning to sell my house?" "I knew they were thinking about it," Tyler said quietly. "But they said it was your idea, that you'd asked them to sell and invest the money differently. I thought you'd changed your mind about wanting to own property while you were active duty." My own brother had been manipulated into believing I had somehow approved this theft. My parents had covered their tracks by creating a false narrative that portrayed their criminal actions as following my instructions. They had stolen my house, lied about the proceeds, and manipulated my brother into believing I had orchestrated the entire situation. The remaining months of my deployment were consumed by rage, planning, and research. I had limited resources for investigation and response while stationed overseas, but I began laying the groundwork for the comprehensive response I would launch upon my return. I consulted with Army Legal Assistance Office about my options, contacted civilian attorneys who specialized in military financial exploitation, and began documenting every aspect of the theft and fraud my parents had committed. Captain Jennifer Hayes, the Army Legal Assistance Attorney at Joint Base Baghdad, was shocked by the scope of the betrayal. "This is one of the most egregious cases of family financial exploitation I've seen," she told me during our consultation. "Your parents didn't just violate your trust, they committed multiple felonies including fraud, forgery, and exploitation of a deployed service member. We have extensive legal resources available to help you pursue this." But I wanted more than legal victory. I wanted my parents to experience the same sense of powerlessness and betrayal they had inflicted on me. I wanted them to understand what it felt like to have their financial security stripped away without warning by people they trusted. I wanted justice, but I also wanted them to learn a lesson they would never forget. Through careful investigation using my cybersecurity skills and military resources, I discovered something that would make perfect justice possible. My parents had made me the successor trustee of their retirement accounts years earlier, back when they'd been proud of my responsible financial planning and wanted to ensure I could handle their affairs if something happened to them. It was a detail they had completely forgotten about, buried in paperwork from when I'd first bought the house, and they'd been helping me establish my financial independence. As their successor trustee, I had legal authority to freeze their retirement accounts if I could demonstrate financial malfeasance or risk to the principal. Given that they had just committed fraud using my property as collateral, I had exactly the documentation I needed to trigger that authority. Their entire retirement fund, built over 30 years of running Thompson Tax Services, was suddenly vulnerable to the same kind of unexpected financial devastation they had inflicted on me. The irony was perfect. They had used their position as my authorized agents to steal my house and destroy my financial plans. Now I would use my position as their successor trustee to freeze their retirement funds and force them to experience the same powerlessness they had imposed on me. The difference was that my actions would be entirely legal, properly documented, and completely justified by their own criminal behavior. My deployment was scheduled to end in 3 months, but I began implementing my response immediately through remote legal channels and financial institutions. I would return home to find my parents facing the same kind of devastating financial surprise they had created for me, except their situation would be entirely self-inflicted and completely legal. They were about to learn that military training includes strategic planning, tactical patience, and the ability to execute complex operations with precision and overwhelming force. The house at 1247 Maple Street was gone forever, sold to strangers who had no idea they were living in the center of a family war. But the money from that sale, along with my parents' retirement security and business reputation, was about to become the battlefield where justice would finally be served. They had taught me that family loyalty was conditional, and that trust could be weaponized against the vulnerable. I was about to teach them that military service creates capabilities they had never imagined, and that strategic patience makes revenge far more devastating than immediate retaliation. Growing up as Jake Thompson in Omaha meant understanding that success was measured in quarterly tax filings and satisfied business clients. Our house on Elm Ridge Drive wasn't just a home, it was a billboard for Thompson Tax Services. Every detail from the manicured lawn to the fresh paint job spoke to potential clients about attention to detail and professional competence. Dad had built his reputation one tax return at a time, starting with neighbors and friends who needed help navigating increasingly complex federal requirements. The business had grown organically through word of mouth and genuine expertise. Bob Thompson wasn't just filling out forms, he was saving people thousands of dollars through legitimate deductions and strategic planning they never would have discovered on their own. During tax season, our dining room table disappeared under stacks of paperwork, and the house smelled perpetually of coffee and the particular stress that comes with April deadlines. Mom managed the client relationships, while Dad handled the technical complexities, creating a partnership that seemed unbreakable. Tyler and I grew up understanding that Thompson Tax Services represented more than income. It was Dad's legacy and our family's contribution to the community. We learned to be quiet during client meetings, to answer the phone professionally even as children, and to recognize that our family's reputation depended on absolute reliability and discretion. These weren't burdens, but sources of pride, knowing that neighbors trusted Dad with their most sensitive financial information, and that our family had earned that trust through decades of ethical service. My earliest memories of family dynamics revolved around these business discussions. Tyler showed natural aptitude for the financial concepts Dad explained during dinner conversations about challenging cases or interesting tax law changes. Even as a middle schooler, Tyler could follow discussions about depreciation schedules and business expense categories that made my eyes glaze over. Dad would light up when Tyler asked thoughtful questions about client situations, seeing in his younger son a natural successor who understood the intellectual challenges that made tax preparation fascinating rather than tedious. I respected what Dad had built, but the work itself never captured my imagination the way it did Tyler's. While Tyler spent summer afternoons learning QuickBooks and organizing client files, I was reading military history and biography books about leaders who'd shaped world events through courage and strategic thinking. The precision and attention to detail that made Dad successful as a tax preparer were qualities I admired, but I wanted to apply those skills in service of something larger than profit margins and regulatory compliance.
The first serious conversations about my military interests came during high school, when Army recruiters visited our school for career presentations. I came home excited about the opportunities for technical training, leadership development, and meaningful service, but my enthusiasm met immediate resistance from parents who saw military service as unnecessarily dangerous and professionally limiting. Dad's concerns weren't about patriotism or respect for veterans. He simply couldn't understand why anyone would choose uncertainty and risk over the security and growth potential of an established family business. Mom's worries were more emotional and immediate. She'd watch news coverage of overseas conflicts with visible anxiety, imagining worst-case scenarios that kept her awake at night. Her questions about military service focused on safety, deployment schedules, and how long I'd be away from family. The thought of her son in harm's way was genuinely terrifying, and she made no attempt to hide those fears or pretend to understand why I'd seek out such risks voluntarily. These family discussions weren't arguments exactly, but they created a persistent tension that colored every conversation about my future plans. Dad would present logical alternatives, college degrees that could lead to stable careers, business opportunities that offered better long-term financial prospects, technical training programs that provided military-style discipline without military-level risk. Tyler supported these suggestions, not out of any desire to undermine my choices, but because he genuinely believed the family business path offered better opportunities than anything I'd find in military service. The disconnect wasn't just about career choices, it reflected fundamental differences in how we viewed purpose and success. Dad measured achievement through client satisfaction, business growth, and financial stability. These were meaningful accomplishments that had provided our family with comfortable,
middle-class prosperity and genuine respect within our community. Tyler shared these values naturally, finding satisfaction in solving complex financial puzzles and building long-term client relationships that generated both profit and personal fulfillment. But I was drawn to service that transcended personal benefit, to challenges that tested character rather than just competence, to work that contributed to something larger than individual success. Military service represented an opportunity to develop leadership skills, technical expertise, and personal resilience while protecting national interests and supporting fellow service members. The financial benefits were secondary to the chance for meaningful contribution and personal growth that military service offered. High school graduation approached with this tension unresolved. Dad had secured me a summer internship at Thompson Tax Services, hoping that direct exposure to the business would reveal opportunities I'd overlooked and demonstrate the intellectual challenges that made his work engaging. Tyler had already proven himself valuable during busy tax seasons, and Dad envisioned both sons eventually taking over different aspects of the business as he approached retirement age. The internship was enlightening, but not in the way Dad had hoped. I discovered genuine respect for the expertise required to navigate complex tax regulations and the client service skills necessary to build lasting professional relationships. Dad wasn't just processing paperwork, he was providing valuable counsel that helped families and small businesses achieve their financial goals while complying with Byzantine federal requirements. The work required continuous learning, careful attention to detail, and the ability to explain complex concepts in accessible terms. But spending those summer months in the office also confirmed that this path wasn't right for me. I felt restless sitting behind a desk analyzing financial documents when I could be developing physical and mental toughness through military training. The client interactions that energized Tyler felt routine and repetitive to me. The steady, predictable nature of tax preparation work that provided Dad with professional satisfaction felt limiting rather than secure. Tyler thrived during that same summer, impressing Dad with his natural client relations skills and innovative ideas for modernizing their service delivery. He suggested online appointment scheduling, digital document storage systems, and social media marketing strategies that could expand their client base beyond traditional word-of-mouth referrals. Dad was clearly delighted to see his business evolving under Tyler's influence while maintaining the personal service standards that had built their reputation. This dynamic created an awkward family balance where Tyler's success in the family business made my different choices seem more pointed and personal. It wasn't that Dad loved Tyler more or respected him more, it was that Tyler's natural fit with the family profession made my resistance appear ungrateful or short-sighted. Dad had built something valuable and sustainable, and Tyler's enthusiasm validated those decades of hard work in ways my military interests simply couldn't. Senior year conversations about college and career planning became increasingly strained. Dad researched business programs at state universities where I could study accounting or finance while maintaining the option to join the family business after graduation. He identified internship opportunities with larger accounting firms where I could gain experience before returning to help expand Thompson Tax Services. Every suggestion was thoughtful and practical, offering genuine opportunities for professional growth and financial success. Mom focused on keeping peace within the family while expressing her own preferences for choices that would keep me closer to home and safer from harm. She'd research college programs enthusiastically, sharing information about business schools and technical programs that could provide military-style challenge without military-level risk. Her efforts to find compromise solutions were touching but missed the fundamental appeal of military service, the chance to be part of something larger than personal advancement. The decisive moment came during a family meeting in December of my senior year. Dad had prepared a comprehensive presentation about opportunities within Thompson Tax Services, including profit-sharing arrangements, continuing education support, and a clear path toward partnership and eventual ownership. Tyler contributed enthusiastically, outlining his vision for modernizing their operations while maintaining their commitment to personalized service. They painted a picture of a growing dynamic business where I could apply my organizational skills and attention to detail while building financial security and professional respect. I listened respectfully to their presentation, recognizing the genuine love and concern behind their planning. They weren't trying to limit my options or dismiss my interests. They were offering me opportunities they believed would lead to happiness and success while keeping our family together. Dad had worked hard to build something valuable, and sharing that success with his sons represented the culmination of his professional dreams. But when my turn came to respond, I had to be honest about what drove me and what kind of future I wanted to build. I explained that military service wasn't about rejecting their values or dismissing their achievements. It was about pursuing my own path toward personal growth and meaningful contribution. I wanted to develop leadership skills under pressure, to work on teams where everyone's safety depended on competence and reliability, to serve my country while building technical expertise that would be valuable in civilian careers afterward. The conversation that followed was emotional but not hostile. Dad struggled to understand why I'd choose uncertainty over security, why I'd risk my safety when safer alternatives existed, why I'd spend years taking orders when I could be building equity in a family business. Mom worried about deployment risks and long separations from family. Tyler seemed genuinely confused about why anyone would walk away from the opportunities they were offering. But something shifted during that discussion. For the first time, they seemed to hear that my military interests weren't rebellion or rejection. They were genuine calling toward different kinds of challenges and contributions. Dad began asking more substantive questions about military occupational specialties and post-service career opportunities. Mom researched military family support programs and deployment communication options. Tyler started recognizing that my different choices didn't diminish the value of his commitment to the family business. By spring, we'd reached an understanding, if not complete agreement. I would enlist after graduation with their reluctant blessing and emotional support. They would maintain their hopes that military service might satisfy my need for challenge and adventure while preparing me to eventually contribute to Thompson Tax Services with expanded skills and broader perspective. It wasn't the resolution any of us had initially wanted, but it preserved family relationships while respecting individual choices. Enlistment day was emotionally complex for everyone. Dad shook my hand with obvious pride mixed with persistent worry about my safety and future prospects. Mom cried but also expressed genuine admiration for my determination to pursue my own path despite family pressure. Tyler seemed sad to see me leave but also relieved that family business discussions could focus on his ideas and enthusiasm without the tension created by my different interests. The bus ride to Fort Bragg represented both ending and beginning, leaving behind the security and familiarity of family business life to pursue unknown challenges and opportunities in military service. I carried with me the organizational skills, attention to detail, and work ethic that Dad had modeled throughout my childhood, but I was finally free to apply those qualities in service of my own vision of meaningful contribution and personal growth. Part 3. Military transformation. Fort Bragg hit me like a cultural hurricane on that first day of in-processing. Everything from the pace of movement to the volume of communication was designed to strip away civilian comfort zones and rebuild recruits according to military standards. The transformation wasn't just physical conditioning or learning to follow orders. It was fundamental rewiring of how I thought about teamwork, leadership, and personal responsibility under pressure. Basic training pushed every limit I thought I had and revealed capabilities I never knew existed. The physical challenges were brutal but manageable. Endless push-ups, long runs with heavy packs, obstacle courses that tested coordination and courage. What surprised me was how much I thrived under the mental pressure of constant evaluation, rapid decision-making, and performance standards that demanded excellence rather than just effort. For the first time in my life, I was in an environment where mediocrity wasn't acceptable and excuses weren't tolerated. The drill sergeants were masters of psychological pressure who could identify individual weaknesses and leverage them for growth. They recognized that I had leadership potential but needed to develop confidence in my ability to make decisions quickly under stress. They pushed me into positions where I had to take charge of struggling soldiers, coordinate complex tasks under time pressure, and maintain composure when everything seemed to be falling apart around me. My fellow recruits came from backgrounds that expanded my understanding of what America really looked like beyond suburban Omaha. There were inner-city kids who'd enlisted to escape poverty and limited opportunities, rural soldiers who'd grown up on farms and ranches, college graduates who'd chosen military service over corporate careers, and immigrants who saw military service as a path toward citizenship and belonging. The diversity was eye-opening and humbling, forcing me to recognize that my middle-class upbringing represented privilege rather than standard American experience. Working alongside these soldiers taught me that competence and character mattered more than background or education level. Some of the smartest and most reliable people in my unit hadn't finished high school, while some college graduates struggled with basic teamwork and following instructions. Military training was the great equalizer that revealed who could perform under pressure and who could be trusted when lives depended on reliability and courage. The technical training for information technology specialist was everything I'd hoped for and more challenging than I'd anticipated. The curriculum covered network security, database management, digital forensics, and cybersecurity protocols that protected critical military communications and intelligence systems. The instructors were seasoned professionals who'd worked in both military and civilian technology sectors, bringing real-world expertise to training that prepared us for immediate operational responsibilities. What fascinated me most was the scope and sophistication of military information systems. These weren't just computers and networks, they were integrated platforms that coordinated everything from supply chain logistics to tactical communications to strategic intelligence analysis. Understanding how to protect these systems from intrusion, maintain their reliability under adverse conditions, and troubleshoot problems quickly under pressure required technical skills that would be valuable in any civilian technology career. The security clearance process was intensive and invasive in ways that civilian background checks never approached. Investigators interviewed neighbors from my childhood, teachers from elementary school, and employers from part-time jobs I'd forgotten about. They verified every detail of my personal history, financial records, and family relationships to ensure I could be trusted with access to classified information and critical systems. During this process, they interviewed my parents extensively about my character, decision-making patterns, and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited by hostile actors. Dad later told me that the investigators had been particularly thorough about my financial responsibility, asking detailed questions about my spending habits, debt management, and long-term planning skills. The security clearance approval felt like official validation that I'd made responsible choices and demonstrated the reliability necessary for positions of trust and responsibility. My first permanent duty assignment brought me into contact with systems and missions that exceeded anything I'd imagined during recruitment. The Cybersecurity Operations Center ran continuously, monitoring threats against military networks worldwide and coordinating responses to intrusion attempts by sophisticated adversaries. The work required constant learning as attack methods evolved and defensive strategies adapted to new threats. The responsibility was both exciting and sobering. Mistakes in cybersecurity could compromise operations, endanger personnel, or provide hostile actors with intelligence that could be used against American interests. Every day brought new challenges that required technical expertise, strategic thinking, and the ability to work effectively under pressure as part of teams where everyone's performance affected overall mission success. My colleagues were impressive professionals who'd chosen military service despite having skills that could have generated substantial civilian salaries. They were motivated by service rather than just compensation, committed to protecting national interests, while developing expertise that would serve them well in post-military careers. Working alongside these dedicated professionals reinforced my conviction that military service represented meaningful contribution rather than career detour.
The leadership development opportunities were unlike anything available in civilian sectors. Military leadership training focused on decision-making under pressure, maintaining unit cohesion during difficult operations, and taking responsibility for outcomes regardless of circumstances. I learned to give clear instructions under stress, to support struggling team members without compromising mission effectiveness, and to accept accountability for both successes and failures. These leadership experiences built confidence that extended far beyond military contexts. I discovered that I could think clearly during crises, communicate effectively with people from diverse backgrounds, and maintain focus on objectives despite distractions and obstacles. The skills weren't just professionally valuable, they were personally transformative, creating a foundation of self-confidence that had been missing during my civilian life. The physical fitness standards maintained throughout military service weren't just about health and appearance, they were about mental discipline and resilience that carried over into every aspect of performance. Maintaining peak physical condition while managing demanding work schedules and continuing education requirements taught time management, priority setting, and personal discipline that became automatic habits. Home leave visits revealed how much I'd changed during military service. The confident, capable person who returned to Omaha was noticeably different from the uncertain teenager who'd left for basic training. Dad noticed the change immediately, commenting that I carried myself differently and approached conversations with new assertiveness and clarity. Mom was relieved to see that military service was developing positive qualities, rather than just exposing me to risks and hardships. Tyler was most struck by the technical expertise I'd developed and the leadership experiences I could describe. During our conversations about our respective career development, he began to understand that military service was providing education and training that would be valuable in civilian technology sectors. The stereotypes about military service being a dead-end career path weren't matching the reality of skills and opportunities I was describing. These home visits also revealed how the family business had evolved during my absence. Tyler had implemented several modernization initiatives that were attracting new clients and improving efficiency. Dad was clearly proud of Tyler's contributions and optimistic about the business's future growth potential. Their success was gratifying rather than threatening. It validated that everyone was pursuing paths that matched their interests and abilities. But the visits also highlighted the growing distance between my military experience and civilian life. The challenges and responsibilities I dealt with daily were difficult to explain to people who hadn't shared similar experiences. The importance of the work, the intensity of the training, and the depth of the commitment were hard to convey to family members who were focused on their own professional and personal concerns. This communication gap wasn't necessarily problematic, but it created a sense of living in two different worlds. Military life was characterized by clear missions, defined standards, and shared commitment to objectives larger than individual benefit. Civilian life seemed more focused on personal advancement, individual comfort, and family concerns that felt smaller in scope than the national security issues I dealt with professionally. My parents began to recognize that military service was providing exactly the kind of meaningful challenge and personal growth I'd been seeking. Dad admitted that he'd underestimated the professional development opportunities available through military service and the technical skills that would transfer to civilian careers. Mom was relieved to see that I was thriving rather than just surviving in military environment. The conversations about my future plans became more supportive and less pressured. Instead of trying to convince me to leave military service early, my parents began asking about long-term career possibilities within the military and post-service opportunities in civilian technology sectors. They were starting to understand that my military experience was building a foundation for success rather than delaying my entry into real adult life. Tyler's questions became more sophisticated as he recognized that my technical training and leadership experience were developing skills that could benefit the family business if I ever chose to return. He started researching how cybersecurity expertise and military leadership training could help Thompson Tax Services expand into business consulting and financial technology services. The possibility of future collaboration became more realistic as he understood what I was learning and how it might complement his business development initiatives. This evolution in family understanding and support was emotionally significant. For the first time since enlisting, I felt like my military service was respected rather than just tolerated. My parents were beginning to see that my different choices had led to genuine accomplishments and valuable skills rather than just delayed entry into conventional career paths. The approval and recognition meant more than I'd expected. Military service was providing the personal fulfillment and professional challenge I'd sought, but family understanding and support made the experience even more meaningful. I was building a career and developing capabilities that I was proud of, and finally my family was beginning to share that pride rather than just worry about my safety and future prospects. Part 4. The property investment. Coming home from my first deployment cycle felt like visiting a foreign country where I happened to speak the language. The civilian rhythms of Omaha life seemed simultaneously familiar and completely alien after months of military structure and overseas operations. Simple activities like grocery shopping and driving personal vehicles required readjustment to freedoms and choices that military life had temporarily suspended. Even sleeping in a quiet room without the constant background noise of base operations took several nights to feel normal. My parents were clearly proud of my service and relieved to have me home safely, but they struggled to understand the person who'd returned from overseas deployment. The confident, decisive soldier who walked through their front door was noticeably different from the son who'd left for military service. I carried myself with new assurance, spoke with authority about complex technical subjects, and demonstrated leadership qualities that had been developed under pressure they couldn't imagine. Dad was particularly intrigued by the cybersecurity expertise I'd developed and the classified work I could describe in general terms. His questions revealed genuine curiosity about how military information systems protected critical infrastructure and coordinated complex operations. For the first time, he seemed to grasp that my military training was providing technical education that would be valuable in civilian technology careers. Tyler had flourished during my absence, implementing digital transformation initiatives that were modernizing Thompson Tax Services while maintaining their personal service standards. He developed online client portals, automated routine processes, and expanded their service offerings to include financial planning and business consulting. The success was impressive and validated his natural abilities in business development and client relations. Our conversations about respective career development revealed how much we'd both grown during the time apart. Tyler had found his calling in business modernization and client service, while I'd discovered genuine passion for cybersecurity and military leadership. Instead of competing for parental approval or family business opportunities, we were each building expertise in areas that suited our different interests and abilities. But the deployment had also taught me about financial independence and long-term planning in ways that civilian life hadn't provided. Living with minimal personal possessions, sending most of my income to savings accounts, and focusing entirely on mission accomplishment had clarified my priorities about money and material security. I wanted to build wealth not for luxury or status, but for the freedom to make choices based on values rather than financial necessity. The idea of buying a house had emerged during conversations with fellow soldiers about post-military financial planning. Many veterans use their deployment savings and VA loan benefits to purchase property that would appreciate while they continued their military careers. Real estate investment provided tangible assets, potential rental income, and long-term wealth building that complemented military retirement benefits. Omaha's real estate market offered excellent opportunities for young buyers with steady income and modest down payments. Property values were stable but growing, neighborhoods were safe and well-maintained, and the cost of living was reasonable compared to military installations in expensive coastal areas. Buying locally would also allow my family to monitor the property during future deployments and provide emergency support if needed. The house hunting process revealed how much my priorities had changed during military service. Instead of focusing on impressive features or fashionable neighborhoods, I evaluated properties for practical considerations like maintenance requirements, rental potential, and long-term appreciation prospects. Military training had taught me to make decisions based on objective analysis rather than emotional appeal. The ranch house at 1247 Maple Street met every criterion I'd established for a smart first property purchase. The neighborhood was stable middle class with good schools and well-maintained homes, suggesting steady appreciation potential. The house itself was solid construction with recent updates to major systems, minimizing immediate maintenance requirements. The price at $145,000 was well within my budget, while leaving reserves for unexpected expenses and future improvements. Most importantly, the property represented genuine independence and adult responsibility. At 22, I would own substantial real estate that I'd purchased with money earned through my own military service. The house would be my sanctuary during leave periods, and my investment foundation for building long-term wealth. It represented everything I'd hoped to achieve through military service, meaningful work that provided financial security and personal pride. My parents were cautiously supportive of the home purchase plan. Dad appreciated the financial logic of building equity rather than paying rent, and Mom liked the idea of me having a permanent base in Omaha that would encourage regular visits home. Tyler was genuinely impressed by my ability to save deployment money and make such a substantial purchase at a young age. The mortgage application process was surprisingly smooth for a young military borrower. My steady income, excellent credit history, and substantial down payment made me an attractive candidate for lenders. The VA loan benefits provided favorable terms and reduced my upfront costs, making the purchase financially comfortable rather than stressful. The closing day was emotionally significant beyond the financial transaction. Signing those documents represented successful transition from military service member living in base housing to property owner with substantial personal assets. Dad attended the closing and seemed genuinely proud of my responsible financial planning and successful execution of a major purchase. The move-in process was simple since I own minimal personal possessions after military life. A bed, basic furniture, some books and electronics, and my military uniforms and equipment filled only a small portion of the 3-bedroom house. But walking through rooms that belonged entirely to me was deeply satisfying in ways I hadn't anticipated. My parents helped with initial setup, bringing household items I'd never owned, and offering suggestions about furniture and decor. Mom seemed particularly pleased to be helping me establish a real home rather than just temporary living quarters. Tyler contributed technical support for internet installation and home security systems, applying his business technology expertise to my personal needs. The neighborhood welcomed me warmly once word spread that the new owner was active duty military. Mrs. Williams next door introduced herself immediately and offered to keep an eye on the property during my deployments. Other neighbors stopped by with cookies and casual conversation, creating the kind of community connections that made military families feel anchored despite frequent relocations. Those first few months of homeownership were some of the most satisfying of my military career. Coming home to my own property after demanding duty days was restorative in ways that base housing had never provided. Working in the yard, making minor improvements, and gradually furnishing the house gave me projects that were personally meaningful, rather than just professionally required. The approaching deployment created practical concerns about property management that I'd anticipated but not fully resolved. Military housing allowances would continue during deployment, covering mortgage payments and basic utilities, but someone needed to handle emergencies, routine maintenance, and seasonal care like lawn maintenance and snow removal. Professional property management companies were available but expensive and impersonal for a homeowner who wanted careful attention to a single property. Military friends had mixed experiences with various management services, reporting problems ranging from poor maintenance to inadequate tenant screening, to financial irregularities that created problems years later. My parents' offer to handle property management seemed logical and generous. Dad had business relationships with contractors and service providers through his tax clients, providing reliable resources for maintenance and repairs. Mom's attention to detail and genuine care for my interests would ensure the property received better care than any hired management service would provide. The legal arrangements were more complex than I'd
anticipated. Property management agreements typically involve significant authority over maintenance decisions, emergency repairs, and tenant relationships if rental income becomes necessary. Dad explained that effective property management required ability to act quickly during emergencies without waiting for remote authorization from deployed owners. Adding my parents as authorized agents on property management accounts seemed like responsible planning rather than dangerous delegation of authority. Military friends had similar arrangements with family members who handled stateside responsibilities during overseas deployments. The legal documentation was extensive but standard for military families who needed reliable support networks for property and financial management. Dad approached the responsibility with the same meticulous attention he brought to his tax preparation work. He researched property management best practices, established relationships with reliable contractors and service providers, and created maintenance schedules that would preserve property value during my absence. His professional expertise and personal investment in my success made him an ideal choice for temporary property oversight. Mom focused on the security and aesthetic aspects of property care, ensuring the house looked occupied and well-maintained to discourage break-ins or vandalism. She arranged for regular lawn care, coordinated snow removal services, and planned to check the interior weekly for problems that could develop during extended vacancy. Tyler offered to handle any technology-related issues that might arise, from internet service problems to home security system maintenance. His business technology expertise and familiarity with digital communication tools would allow efficient coordination of property management activities while I was overseas. The family meeting where we finalized these arrangements felt like successful military mission planning. Everyone understood their responsibilities, communication protocols were established, and contingency plans were developed for various scenarios that might require immediate response. I felt confident that my property would receive excellent care while I focused entirely on my overseas mission. The deployment preparation period was emotionally complex as always, but having my own property to return to made the separation feel different from previous overseas assignments. Instead of returning to temporary base housing, I would come home to my own house with familiar rooms, personal possessions, and neighborhood relationships. The property represented continuity and stability that made deployments feel like temporary separations rather than complete lifestyle disruptions. My parents seemed genuinely honored to be trusted with such significant responsibility and determined to prove worthy of that trust. Their involvement in my property management created new dimensions to our relationship, moving beyond parent-child dynamics toward adult collaboration on shared objectives. For the first time since enlisting, I felt like my military service was creating opportunities for family partnership rather than just sources of worry and separation. The last family dinner before deployment was relaxed and optimistic in ways that previous pre-deployment gatherings had never achieved. Instead of focusing on safety concerns and separation anxiety, we discussed property maintenance schedules, communication protocols, and plans for improvements I wanted to make after returning from overseas. The house had given us shared projects and common goals that made my military service feel more connected to family life. Standing in my own living room the night before deploying, I felt adult satisfaction that had been missing during previous overseas assignments. The house represented successful transition from dependent child to independent property owner, from young soldier following orders to mature military professional building wealth and planning for the future. Whatever challenges awaited me overseas, I would return to property that belonged entirely to me and family relationships based on mutual respect rather than just obligation and concern. The deployment ahead would test every aspect of these arrangements, but I felt confident that the foundation we'd built would support both my overseas mission and my long-term financial goals. Military service was providing exactly the kind of meaningful challenges and personal growth I'd sought, and property ownership was creating stability and investment returns that would serve me well throughout my career and beyond. Part 5. The devastating Discovery Joint Base Ballad operated on a rhythm that became my entire universe within weeks of arrival. The Cybersecurity Operations Center never slept, with teams rotating through 12-hour shifts monitoring threat levels, analyzing intrusion attempts, and coordinating defensive responses across military networks worldwide. The work was intellectually demanding and operationally critical, requiring constant focus on details that could mean the difference between secure communications and compromised operations. My role involved monitoring network traffic for anomalous patterns that might indicate hostile penetration attempts, analyzing suspicious activities to determine threat levels, and coordinating with other bases to implement defensive measures when attacks were detected. The technical challenges were exactly what I'd hoped for when choosing cybersecurity as my military specialty, combining cutting-edge technology with high-stakes problem-solving that directly supported mission success. The classified nature of much of our work meant that detailed discussions with family were impossible, but I could share general information about my duties and experiences during our weekly video calls. These conversations became lifelines to normal civilian life, brief escapes from the intensity of military operations into familiar family dynamics and hometown concerns. Dad seemed genuinely fascinated by the glimpses I could provide into military cybersecurity operations. His questions revealed growing respect for the technical expertise my military service was developing and the critical importance of the work I was performing. For the first time since enlisting, he seemed to understand that military service was providing education and experience that would be valuable throughout my career. Mom focused on my health, safety, and morale during our calls, asking about living conditions, food quality, and recreational opportunities available on base. Her maternal concerns were touching and helped maintain emotional connections to home that kept deployment stress manageable. Knowing that my family was thinking about me daily and anxiously awaiting each communication made the separation easier to endure. Tyler shared updates about Thompson Tax Services expansion and his success implementing modernization initiatives that were attracting new clients. His enthusiasm for the business development work was infectious, and I found myself genuinely excited about his accomplishments and optimistic about the family business's future prospects. Our different career paths were both proving successful in ways that validated our respective choices. The house updates were consistently positive during those first months of deployment. Dad reported that everything was functioning normally, the neighborhood remained quiet and safe, and he was handling routine maintenance issues as they arose. Mom added details about the lawn care service she'd arranged and her weekly interior inspections that confirmed everything remained secure and well maintained. These property management reports were reassuring and allowed me to focus entirely on my mission without worrying about problems developing at home. Military deployment was stressful enough without concerns about property damage, break-ins, or maintenance emergencies that could create financial problems or require emergency leave to resolve. The routine of military operations and family communications created stability that made 15-month deployment feel manageable rather than overwhelming. Each week brought new technical challenges at work and familiar family conversations that maintained connections to civilian life. The combination kept me grounded and motivated, working toward successful completion of my overseas mission and eventual return to my own property and established life in Omaha. 6 months into deployment, Dad mentioned during one of our routine calls that real estate activity in my neighborhood had increased significantly. Several houses had sold quickly at prices well above previous market levels, and real estate agents were actively soliciting homeowners about selling opportunities. He presented this information as neighborhood gossip rather than anything directly relevant to my situation. The conversation was brief because I was preparing for a complex network security operation that required my full attention. I thanked Dad for keeping me informed about local developments and asked him to continue monitoring the situation. The rising property values were good news for my long-term investment, but I was focused entirely on my military responsibilities and didn't give the real estate market much additional thought. Looking back, that phone call represented the beginning of the betrayal that would destroy my trust in my family forever. What I interpreted as helpful neighborhood updates were actually the opening moves in a calculated plan to steal my property while I was deployed and unable to respond immediately. Dad was testing my reactions to real estate market discussions and establishing a narrative framework that would later justify their actions. The work at Joint Base Ballad intensified during that period as our team tracked increasingly sophisticated cyber attacks against military communication networks. The technical challenges required complete focus and long hours that left little mental energy for civilian concerns. I was building expertise that would be valuable throughout my career while contributing to national security operations that were genuinely meaningful and important. My parents seemed proud of the work I was describing in general terms and supportive of my dedication to mission success. They understood that deployment represented temporary sacrifice for long-term career advancement and personal growth. Their encouragement helped maintain morale during particularly demanding operational periods when the stress of deployment felt overwhelming. 3 months later, I received an email that shattered my world and changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Mrs. Williams had sent a brief message with a subject line that immediately caught my attention. "Concerned about your house." Her words were simple and devastating. Strangers were living in my house, claiming they'd bought it from my parents 3 months earlier. I read that email at least 10 times before the meaning fully registered. Strangers were living in my house, my parents had sold my house. Without my permission. While I was deployed. Serving my country, the betrayal was so complete and unexpected that I initially wondered if there had been some kind of administrative error or identity theft. But deep down I knew exactly what had happened. My parents had used their authority as my property managers to sell my house during the real estate market surge, probably justifying their actions as smart financial management that I should appreciate. They had stolen my property while I was unable to investigate or respond, counting on my military discipline and family loyalty to prevent immediate retaliation. My first instinct was to call them immediately, but overseas communication restrictions and time zone differences made immediate contact impossible. I spent 3 days trying to reach them during their business hours, leaving increasingly urgent voicemails that went unanswered. The delay was probably intentional, giving them time to prepare their justifications and coordinate their story before facing my questions. When they finally called me back, Dad's voice carried the calm, controlled tone he used when delivering unwelcome news to tax clients. There was no acknowledgement of my frantic attempts to reach them, no apology for the shock and confusion they'd created, no recognition that they'd acted without permission or authorization. "Jake, we need to discuss the house situation," he began as if we were reviewing a minor business decision rather than addressing the theft of my most valuable possession. The real estate market created an opportunity that was too good to pass up. We sold the property for $185,000, which represents a $40,000 profit over what you paid just 2 years ago. We've invested the proceeds in a diversified portfolio that will generate much better returns than real estate.
The casual matter-of-fact way he presented this information was almost as shocking as the theft itself. He was describing the sale of my house as if it was a routine business transaction he'd handled on my behalf, as if I should be grateful for his financial expertise and market timing. There was no acknowledgement that he'd sold my property without permission, no apology for the deception, no recognition that he'd violated every principle of trust and legal authority I'd assumed governed our arrangement. "You sold my house." The words came out as barely controlled fury, my military training and composure failing completely under the weight of such absolute betrayal. The question hung in the digital silence between Iraq and Nebraska, carrying with it the destruction of everything I'd believed about family loyalty and parental responsibility. "We maximized your investment potential," Dad replied with the same rational tone, as if correcting a misunderstanding rather than acknowledging theft. "Real estate markets are cyclical, and we recognize that property values in your neighborhood had peaked. Holding the asset longer would have meant missing the optimal selling opportunity. We acted in your best financial interests." Mom's voice joined the conversation at that point, adding her own layer of justification that made the betrayal even more complete. "Honey, you're so far away and couldn't possibly make informed decisions about local market conditions. We used our business expertise and community connections to time the sale perfectly. The money is safe and growing much faster than it would have sitting in an empty house in Omaha." Their calm, reasonable explanations felt like psychological warfare designed to make me question my own reaction to their theft. They were presenting criminal behavior as financial wisdom, betrayal as family support, and fraud as responsible investment management. The gaslighting was so complete and confident that for a moment I wondered if I was overreacting to decisions that were actually in my best interests. But military training had taught me to trust my instincts and analyze situations objectively rather than accepting explanations that didn't match observable facts. The observable fact was that they'd sold my property without my knowledge or consent while I was deployed and unable to respond immediately. No amount of financial justification could transform that betrayal into legitimate investment management. "Where exactly is this diversified portfolio you've created with my money?" I demanded, struggling to maintain professional composure while rage threatened to overwhelm my ability to think clearly. "I want account numbers, investment details, and documentation showing exactly how you've invested the proceeds from my property." The pause before Dad's response was telling. When he finally answered, his explanations became vague and evasive in ways that immediately raised additional red flags about their true intentions. He mentioned market volatility, the need for professional management, and complex investment strategies that required ongoing oversight, but he provided no specific information about accounts, institutions, or investment vehicles. Mom added her own non-answers about protecting my interests and ensuring the money remained safe until I returned from deployment, but she also avoided providing any concrete details about where the money was actually invested or how I could verify its security. Their evasiveness confirmed what I was beginning to suspect: there was no diversified portfolio, no investment strategy, no financial management for my benefit. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but every exchange made the situation worse. My parents had not only stolen my house, but were lying about what they'd done with the proceeds. They had betrayed my trust, violated their legal authority, and were now attempting to manipulate me into accepting their criminal behavior as evidence of their care and expertise. When the call finally ended, I sat in my small quarters at Joint Base Ballad feeling more isolated and betrayed than at any point during my military service. The family I'd trusted to protect my interests while I served overseas had stolen my most valuable possession and were lying about their actions. The parents who'd raised me to value honesty and responsibility had committed fraud against their own son while he was deployed in a combat zone. The emotional impact was devastating, but my military training kicked in to help me focus on practical responses rather than just processing the betrayal. I had limited communication time and restricted internet access, but I could use those resources to investigate what had actually happened to my money and begin building a response to their theft. Over the following days, I used every available minute of computer access to research property records, business filings, and financial information that might reveal the truth about my parents' actions. What I discovered was even worse than theft: it was systematic fraud designed to save their failing business at my expense. Public property records confirmed that my house had indeed been sold for $185,000 to a family named Martinez, who appeared to be legitimate buyers rather than conspirators in any fraudulent scheme. The sale had been processed through normal real estate channels with appropriate documentation and legal oversight, which meant my parents had used their authority as my property managers to execute a seemingly legitimate transaction. But business records told a different story about what had happened to the money from that sale. Thompson Tax Services had received a substantial cash infusion of approximately $200,000 right around the time my house was sold, money that had been used to pay off business debts, purchase new equipment, and expand their office space. The timing was too coincidental to be anything other than direct evidence that my house proceeds had been used to rescue their struggling business. Further investigation revealed that Thompson Tax Services had been facing serious financial difficulties that my parents had hidden from both Tyler and me. Client losses during COVID had reduced their income substantially, and Dad had made several bad investments with business funds that had created additional financial pressure. They had been discussing bankruptcy options before the real estate market surge created an opportunity to solve their problems using my property. Phone calls with Tyler during subsequent weeks revealed additional disturbing details about the family dynamics I'd been shielded from while overseas. They've been stressed about money for over a year, he admitted reluctantly when I pressed him for information about the business's financial condition. Dad lost several major commercial clients when businesses closed during the pandemic, and some of his investment strategies didn't work out as planned. Did you know they were planning to sell my house? The question hung between us, carrying the weight of family loyalty conflicts that Tyler had never anticipated facing. I knew they were thinking about it, Tyler said quietly, his voice revealing the discomfort of being caught between his parents and his brother. But they told me it was your idea, that you'd called and asked them to sell the property and invest the money differently. They said you'd decided that owning real estate while on active duty was too complicated and that you wanted them to handle the investment management. The manipulation was even more extensive than I'd realized. My parents hadn't just stolen my house, they'd created an elaborate false narrative that portrayed their theft as following my instructions. They had lied to Tyler, making him complicit in their deception by convincing him that I had somehow approved or requested the sale. Tyler, I never asked them to sell my house, I said firmly, needing him to understand the reality of what our parents had done. I found out about the sale from Mrs. Williams, who saw strangers moving into my property. Everything they told you about me requesting the sale was a lie designed to cover up their theft. The silence that followed was painful for both of us. Tyler was realizing that he'd been manipulated into believing a false story that made him feel comfortable about our parents' actions. I was understanding that the betrayal extended beyond theft to include systematic deception designed to prevent family members from questioning or interfering with their criminal behavior. I'm sorry, Jake, Tyler finally said, his voice carrying genuine remorse and confusion. I should have called you directly to confirm, but their explanation seemed reasonable, and I didn't want to bother you with business details while you were deployed. I thought they were handling everything properly. Tyler's apology was touching but unnecessary. He'd been manipulated by expert liars who'd had years to perfect their deception techniques. The real responsibility lay with parents who'd betrayed their son's trust while he was serving overseas and then lied to their other son to prevent him from exposing their theft. The remaining months of my deployment were consumed by rage, planning, and investigation. I had limited resources for immediate response while stationed overseas, but I began laying the groundwork for the comprehensive legal and financial response I would launch upon returning to the United States. Every spare moment was spent researching my options, documenting the theft, and preparing for the confrontation that would determine whether my parents faced consequences for their actions. Captain Jennifer Hayes at the Army Legal Assistance Office was shocked by the scope and audacity of my parents' betrayal. This is one of the most egregious cases of family financial exploitation I've encountered, she told me during our initial consultation. Your parents didn't just violate your trust, they committed multiple federal crimes including fraud, exploitation of a deployed service member, and potentially elder abuse statutes if they're managing retirement accounts inappropriately. The legal consultation revealed that I had extensive options for pursuing both civil and criminal remedies against my parents. Military families were protected by specific federal statutes that made financial exploitation during deployment particularly serious crimes with severe penalties. Additionally, the state where the theft occurred had strong consumer protection laws that provided additional avenues for recovery and punishment. But Captain Hayes also warned me about the emotional and practical costs of pursuing legal action against family members. You have strong legal grounds for prosecution and recovery, she explained, but family legal battles are uniquely destructive and often create permanent damage that extends far beyond the immediate participants. You need to consider what kind of resolution you actually want and whether legal action will achieve those goals. Her questions forced me to examine my motivations and objectives more carefully than I'd done during the initial shock and rage of discovery. Did I want financial recovery, criminal punishment, public humiliation, or simply acknowledgement of wrongdoing? Was I seeking justice or revenge, and what was the difference between those two objectives? Military training had taught me to think strategically about objectives and tactics, to consider second and third order effects of actions, and to choose approaches that maximize chances of mission success. Applying those principles to my family situation meant developing a comprehensive response that would achieve accountability while preserving the possibility of eventual relationship repair. My investigation had revealed additional leverage that could make legal action unnecessary if my parents could be convinced to make voluntary restitution. As their son who they'd made successor trustee of their retirement accounts years earlier, I had legal authority to freeze those accounts if I could demonstrate financial malfeasance or risk to the principal. The irony was perfect and provided exactly the kind of strategic response that military training had prepared me to execute. My parents had used their authority over my property to steal my house and destroy my financial security. I could use my authority over their retirement accounts to freeze their financial security and force them to experience the same powerlessness they'd inflicted on me. But unlike their theft of my property, my actions would be entirely legal, properly documented, and completely justified by their own criminal behavior. I wouldn't be committing crimes or violating trust. I would be using legitimate authority to protect assets from people who'd proven themselves capable of financial fraud and theft. The remaining weeks of deployment passed slowly as I refined my strategy and gathered additional evidence of my parents' criminal behavior. Every day brought new determination to ensure they faced appropriate consequences for their betrayal while I served overseas. They had taught me that family loyalty was conditional and that trust could be weaponized against the vulnerable. I was preparing to teach them that military service develops capabilities they'd never imagined and that strategic patience makes justice far more devastating than immediate retaliation. My parents' theft of my house would cost them their retirement security, their business reputation, and their relationship with both of their sons. They'd stolen my future to save their present, but they'd also given me the motivation and justification to destroy the financial foundation they'd spent 30 years building. The 22-year-old soldier they'd betrayed while he served overseas was returning home as a 24-year-old veteran with the skills, resources, and determination to ensure that justice was served completely and permanently. The transport flight from Joint Base Ballard to Fort Bragg felt like traveling backward through time toward a confrontation that would determine the future of my family relationships and my own sense of justice. I was no longer the trusting son who'd left for deployment, believing his parents would protect his interests while he served his country. I was returning as someone who understood that family loyalty required reciprocity and that betrayal demanded consequences regardless of the relationships involved. Tyler had no idea what was coming when I landed at Fort Bragg and began the process of transitioning from deployment back to stateside operations. My parents had no idea that their theft had been discovered and documented, that their lies had been exposed and contradicted, that their retirement security was about to disappear as suddenly and completely as my house had vanished while I was deployed. They were about to learn that stealing from a deployed soldier was the worst financial decision they'd ever made, and that military training included lessons about justice, strategy, and execution that they'd never anticipated facing. The empty lot where my house used to be would soon be matched by empty retirement accounts where their financial security used to exist. They'd taught me that family trust was negotiable, and I was about to teach them that military justice was inevitable. The airplane descended toward North Carolina carrying a very different person than the one who'd departed for Iraq 15 months earlier. Deployment had taught me about loyalty, betrayal, strategic thinking, and the difference between justice and revenge. My parents were about to receive an education about the consequences of stealing from someone who'd learned those lessons under combat conditions while serving his country overseas. My house was gone forever, sold to innocent buyers who had no role in my family's criminal conspiracy. But the money from that theft, along with my parents' retirement dreams and business reputation, was about to become the battlefield where justice would finally be served with military precision and overwhelming force. They'd stolen my property while I was deployed, and I was returning home with the skills and determination to ensure they experienced exactly the same financial devastation they'd inflicted on me. The wheels touched down at Fort Bragg with a soldier aboard who was no longer interested in family reconciliation or forgiveness. I was coming home
to execute a mission of accountability that would teach my parents that betraying a deployed service member was a mistake they'd regret for the rest of their lives. Military training had prepared me for exactly this kind of strategic operation, and I was finally ready to demonstrate what I'd learned about justice, patience, and the devastating effectiveness of well-planned retaliation. The drive from Fort Bragg to Omaha took 18 hours of interstate highways that gave me plenty of time to finalize my strategy and prepare mentally for the confrontation ahead. My parents had no idea I was returning early from deployment or that I'd discovered their theft and lies. They thought they had months to prepare their justifications and coordinate their story before facing my questions about the house sale. The element of surprise was crucial to my plan. Military operations succeeded through superior intelligence, strategic timing, and overwhelming force applied at the moment of maximum enemy vulnerability. My parents were about to experience all three principles in action as their comfortable lies collapsed under the weight of documented evidence and legal consequences they'd never anticipated. I'd arranged for early separation from active duty through the Army's Exceptional Family Member Program, which allowed service members to leave military service early when family circumstances required immediate attention. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents' theft of my house qualified as exactly the kind of family emergency that justified early discharge from military obligations. Captain Hayes had connected me with civilian attorneys who specialized in military financial exploitation cases and had extensive experience prosecuting family members who stole from deployed service members. The legal team was already preparing documentation for both civil recovery and criminal prosecution, while I drove toward Nebraska with a rental car full of evidence and legal paperwork. But the most devastating weapon in my arsenal wasn't legal action, it was the successor trustee authority my parents had given me years earlier when they'd wanted to demonstrate trust in my financial responsibility. They'd forgotten about those documents completely, but I'd found them during my investigation of their business records. Their own paperwork would be the instrument of their financial destruction. David Kim had reviewed the trustee documentation and confirmed that I had broad authority to freeze their retirement accounts if I could demonstrate financial misconduct or risk to the principal. My parents' theft of my house and subsequent lies about investment management provided exactly the evidence needed to trigger that authority immediately upon my return. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its completeness. I would confront my parents with evidence of their theft, demand immediate restitution, and if they refused or continued lying, I would freeze their retirement accounts and initiate legal proceedings that would destroy their business reputation and financial security permanently. They'd stolen my house while I was deployed serving my country. I was returning home with the legal authority and military training necessary to ensure they experienced exactly the same financial devastation they'd inflicted on me, except their consequences would be entirely self-inflicted and completely legal. Amanda Foster had agreed to serve as my financial advisor during the asset recovery process and help me rebuild my investment portfolio once restitution was obtained. Her expertise in military financial planning and experience with deployment savings strategies would ensure that recovered funds were invested properly for long-term wealth building rather than immediate consumption. The first stop in Omaha was the empty lot where my house used to stand. Seeing the space where my property had been was emotionally devastating but also motivating. The Martinez family had built a small garden where my front yard used to be, and children's toys were scattered around the backyard where I'd planned to install fitness equipment for home workouts during leave periods. Mrs. Williams saw me standing in the street and came over immediately, her face showing both relief and concern. "Jake, thank goodness you're home safe. I wasn't sure if my email reached you and I've been so worried about what happened to your house. Your parents told the new owners that you decided to sell while deployed, but something about the whole situation never felt right to me." Her testimony would be valuable during legal proceedings, but more importantly, her concern demonstrated that my parents' lies hadn't fooled everyone in the neighborhood. People who'd known me before deployment remembered that I'd been proud of homeownership and excited about returning to my own property after overseas service. "Thank you for letting me know what happened," I told her sincerely. "You probably saved me from months of confusion and investigation. What you saw was exactly what it looked like. They sold my house without permission while I was deployed." Mrs. Williams nodded grimly, clearly unsurprised by my confirmation of her suspicions. "I figured as much. Your father came by several times after the sale, acting nervous and asking if anyone had been asking questions about the property. He seemed guilty rather than proud about handling a successful real estate transaction for his son." The second stop was Thompson Tax Services, where I planned to observe my parents' current routine before revealing my presence in Omaha. The office looked prosperous from the outside with new signage and fresh paint that suggested recent renovation work. The improvements had been funded with money stolen from my house sale, which made their appearance particularly offensive. Through the windows, I could see Tyler working at a computer while Dad reviewed documents at his desk. Mom was apparently handling client meetings in the conference room where I could see gestures and movement but couldn't identify the specific people involved. The scene looked normal and successful, with no indication of the criminal behavior that had funded their recent business expansion. Tyler had grown into his role as business development manager and looked comfortable in the professional environment that suited his interests and abilities. Watching him work, I felt genuine sadness that my parents' theft would inevitably damage his relationship with them and possibly threaten the business success he'd worked hard to achieve. But their crimes couldn't be ignored or minimized to protect Tyler from the consequences of our parents' choices. They'd stolen from a deployed soldier and lied about their actions to everyone in the family. Justice required accountability, regardless of the collateral damage to other family relationships or business operations. The third stop was First National Bank, where I needed to activate my successor trustee authority and freeze my parents' retirement accounts before confronting them directly. The bank manager, Rebecca Martinez, had worked with my family for years and knew me as the responsible son who'd bought his first house at a young age through military savings. "Jake, welcome back from deployment," she said warmly when I entered her office with the legal documentation. "Your parents mentioned you were serving overseas. How was your military service?" Her friendly greeting made what I was about to do even more difficult, but criminal behavior demanded consequences regardless of social discomfort. "Military service was excellent preparation for what I need to do today," I replied, placing the trustee documents on her desk along with David Kim's legal analysis of my authority. "I need to freeze my parents' retirement accounts immediately due to financial misconduct that puts the principal at risk." Rebecca's expression shifted from friendly greeting to professional concern as she reviewed the documentation. The legal paperwork was thorough and properly executed, clearly establishing my authority as successor trustee and the grounds for immediate protective action. "This is highly unusual," she said carefully, "but the documentation appears to be in order. Can you explain the circumstances that require this action?" Her question was both professional due diligence and personal concern about the family dynamics involved. I explained the theft of my house, the lies about investment management, and the evidence that my parents had used the proceeds to rescue their failing business rather than investing the money for my benefit. Rebecca listened with growing shock and dismay as the scope of their betrayal became clear. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," she said when I finished explaining the situation. "Your parents have been clients here for decades, and this behavior is completely contrary to everything we thought we knew about their character and integrity." The account freeze was processed within an hour, locking down approximately $400,000 in retirement savings that my parents had accumulated over 30 years of running Thompson Tax Services. They would discover the freeze when they tried to access the accounts or receive notification letters from the bank's trust department. The timing was crucial because I wanted them to experience the same shock and helplessness I'd felt when discovering my house had been sold without permission. They needed to understand what it felt like to have financial security stripped away suddenly by someone they'd trusted with authority over their assets. David Kim called as I left the bank to confirm that civil lawsuit paperwork had been filed and that criminal complaints were being processed through both federal and state prosecutors. "The legal machinery is in motion," he reported. "Your parents will be served with papers within 24 hours, and arrest warrants are being prepared pending prosecutorial review of the evidence." The final preparation before confronting my parents was a meeting with Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, who'd agreed to serve as witness and support during the confrontation. Military personnel often faced family exploitation during deployment, and the Army had protocols for supporting soldiers who needed assistance dealing with criminal behavior by family members. "You sure you're ready for this?" Maria asked as we reviewed the plan one final time. Family confrontations can get emotional really quickly, and you want to maintain control of the situation and your own reactions throughout the process. Military training had prepared me for high-stress situations that required clear thinking and disciplined responses despite emotional pressure. Confronting criminal parents would be personally difficult but professionally manageable using techniques I'd learned for operating under pressure and hostile environments. The drive to my parents' house felt like approaching a target for military operation rather than visiting family. Everything about the situation required tactical thinking, strategic patience, and disciplined execution rather than emotional responses that could compromise mission success. Their house looked exactly the same as when I'd left for deployment, with the same landscaping and exterior appearance that had been maintained throughout my childhood. But knowing what I now knew about their criminal behavior and financial deception made the familiar setting feel foreign and hostile. Tyler's car was in the driveway, which meant he was home from the office and would witness whatever confrontation followed. That complication wasn't ideal, but family crimes affected all family members, and Tyler needed to understand the truth about our parents' behavior regardless of how painful that knowledge might be. I knocked on the front door rather than using my key, wanting to control the interaction from the beginning and maintain the formality appropriate for confronting criminals rather than visiting family. The sound of footsteps approaching the door was followed by Mom's voice asking who was there. "It's Jake," I replied simply, giving no indication of my emotional state or intentions for the visit. The door opened to reveal Mom's shocked face as she processed my unexpected presence. "Jake, you're home early. We weren't expecting you for months yet. Is everything okay? Are you hurt?" Her questions came rapidly, mixing genuine maternal concern with obvious anxiety about why I'd returned without advance notice. "We need to talk about the house," I said without returning her greeting or acknowledging her questions. "All of us. Is Dad home?" The cold professional tone was intentional, designed to communicate that this wasn't a social visit or family reunion. Dad appeared behind Mom within seconds, his expression shifting from surprise to calculation as he processed my presence and demeanor. "Jake, this is unexpected. Come in, come in. We should have talked more about the real estate situation before now. There's a lot to explain about the investment decisions we made." His immediate attempt to control the narrative and frame the conversation around investment decisions rather than theft was exactly what I'd expected. He was preparing to deploy the same rational, calm explanations that had worked during our phone calls from Iraq. Tyler emerged from the family room with obvious confusion and concern about the tension he could sense despite not understanding its source. "Jake, what's going on? You didn't tell us you were coming home early. Did something happen with your deployment?" "Something happened with my house," I replied, looking directly at Dad and Mom rather than Tyler. "Something criminal that's going to have serious consequences for everyone involved." The word criminal hung in the air like an explosive device whose timer had just started counting down. Dad's carefully controlled expression wavered slightly, while Mom's face showed genuine fear for the first time since I'd arrived. "Let's sit down and discuss this rationally," Dad said, gesturing toward the living room where we'd had so many family meetings over the years. "There are complex financial considerations that require careful explanation." "There's nothing complex about theft," I replied, remaining standing near the door rather than moving deeper into the house. "You sold my house without permission while I was deployed. You used the money to save your failing business. You lied to Tyler about having my approval. Those are crimes, not investment strategies." Tyler's sharp intake of breath indicated that he was beginning to understand the reality of what our parents had done and the extent of the lies they'd told him. His face showed the same shock and betrayal I'd experienced when first learning about the theft. "That's not what happened," Dad insisted, but his voice lacked the confident authority he'd projected during our overseas phone calls. "We acted in your best interest based on market conditions you couldn't evaluate from Iraq. Every decision was made to maximize your financial benefit. Then you won't mind showing me the account statements for this diversified portfolio you created with my money." I responded, pulling out my phone to record the conversation. "I want to see exactly how you invested the $185,000 from my house sale." The silence that followed was damning. Mom looked at Dad with obvious panic while Tyler stared at both parents with growing horror as he realized the scope of their deception. Dad's calm facade was cracking under the pressure of specific demands for documentation he couldn't provide. "The investments are complex," Dad stammered, with multiple account structures that require professional management. "We can review the details when you've had time to readjust from deployment and think clearly about long-term financial planning." "I'm thinking very clearly," I said firmly. "Clear enough to know that you stole my house and spent the money on your business. Clear enough to know that you lied about everything. And clear enough to know that you're continuing to lie right now." Tyler stood up abruptly, his face showing the kind of moral revulsion that comes from realizing you've been manipulated by people you trusted completely. "Dad, did you really steal Jake's house? Did you lie to me about him approving the sale?" The question forced Dad to choose between admitting criminal behavior or lying directly to Tyler's face while Tyler was specifically asking for the truth.
Either choice would damage his relationship with at least one son and probably destroy Tyler's respect for him permanently. We made difficult decisions under challenging circumstances, Dad said evasively, still trying to avoid direct admission of wrongdoing. Business was struggling due to circumstances beyond our control, and the real estate opportunity presented a solution that benefited everyone involved. Benefited everyone except the son whose house you stole, I corrected. Benefited everyone except the soldier who was deployed overseas serving his country while his parents committed crimes using his property. Mom finally spoke, her voice breaking with emotion that might have been genuine remorse, or might have been fear about consequences. We never meant to hurt you, Jake. We were trying to protect your investment and our family's financial stability. Everything we did was out of love and concern for everyone's future. If you loved me, you wouldn't have stolen from me. I replied without any softening of tone. If you were concerned about my future, you wouldn't have destroyed my financial security while I was deployed. Love doesn't justify theft, and concern doesn't excuse criminal behavior. The confrontation continued for another 30 minutes, with my parents alternating between denial, justification, and attempts at emotional manipulation. They tried appealing to family loyalty, claiming their actions had been misunderstood, and promising to make everything right if I would just trust them to fix the situation. But military training had taught me to recognize deception and manipulation under pressure. Every word they spoke confirmed that they felt no genuine remorse for their criminal behavior and would continue lying and stealing if given the opportunity. They were criminals who happened to be my parents, not parents who'd made a mistake. Tyler listened to the entire confrontation with growing disgust and disappointment. When Dad tried to appeal to him for support, Tyler's response was definitive and final. I can't believe you lied to me about Jake approving the sale. I can't believe you stole his house. I can't believe you're still trying to justify what you did instead of apologizing and making it right. The moment had come to reveal the consequences I'd prepared for their criminal behavior. Since you're not willing to admit what you did or make voluntary restitution, I said calmly, you'll need to deal with the legal system and financial consequences I've already initiated. Dad's expression shifted to alarm as he realized that this confrontation wasn't just emotional processing, but the beginning of serious consequences. What legal system? What consequences? You can't seriously be considering legal action against your own parents. I've already filed civil lawsuits for theft and fraud, I replied, matter-of-factly. Criminal complaints are being processed by federal and state prosecutors. And I've frozen your retirement accounts using my successor trustee authority to protect the assets from further financial misconduct. The last revelation hit them like a physical blow. Mom gasped and reached for Dad's arm while his face went completely pale. They'd forgotten about the trustee documentation completely, and the realization that their retirement security was now under my control was devastating. You can't freeze our retirement accounts, Dad protested weakly. That money isn't yours. We earned it over 30 years of building our business. I earned my house over 2 years of military service, I countered. That didn't stop you from stealing it while I was deployed. The difference is that my authority over your retirement accounts is legal and documented, while your theft of my house was criminal and fraudulent. Tyler looked back and forth between his parents and me with obvious distress about the destruction of our family relationships. This is insane, he said quietly. How did we get to a point where everyone is stealing from each other and threatening legal action? We got here because Mom and Dad chose to commit crimes instead of managing their business problems honestly. I replied, I didn't steal anything from anyone. I'm using legal authority they gave me to protect assets from people who've proven themselves capable of theft and fraud. The conversation was effectively over. My parents understood that they faced serious legal and financial consequences for their criminal behavior. Tyler understood that he'd been manipulated and lied to by parents he'd trusted completely. I had delivered accountability for their theft while maintaining complete legal and moral authority throughout the process. You have 48 hours to arrange voluntary restitution of the full amount stolen from my house sale. I told my parents as I prepared to leave. If you don't, the legal proceedings will continue, and your retirement accounts will remain frozen until courts determine appropriate restitution and penalties. Dad made one final attempt at emotional manipulation. Jake, we're your parents. We love you and we've always tried to do what's best for our family. Don't let this situation destroy our relationships permanently. You destroyed our relationship when you stole my house, I replied without hesitation. You destroyed Tyler's trust when you lied to him about my approval. You destroyed our family when you chose criminal behavior over honest communication about your business problems. Walking away from my childhood home felt like completing a military mission rather than ending a family relationship. I'd achieved the objectives of confronting their criminal behavior, demanding accountability, and establishing consequences for their theft. The emotional cost was significant but necessary for justice and personal integrity. Tyler followed me outside, his face showing the strain of watching his family implode in the span of one conversation. Jake, I had no idea what they'd really done. If I'd known they were lying about your approval, I would have called you immediately to verify. I know, I told him sincerely. They manipulated you the same way they manipulated me, just with different lies. You're not responsible for their criminal behavior or their deception. What happens now? He asked. Clearly dreading the answer but needing to understand the consequences his parents had created. Now they face the legal system and learn that stealing from deployed military personnel has serious consequences. I replied, their retirement security is gone, their business reputation will be destroyed, and they'll probably face criminal charges that could include jail time. Tyler nodded sadly, understanding that our parents had created consequences that couldn't be avoided or minimized through family loyalty or emotional appeals. I'm sorry this happened to you, Jake. And I'm sorry they lied to me about your involvement. I should have verified their story directly with you. Don't apologize for trusting your parents, I said gently. That's what children are supposed to be able to do. They violated that trust, not you. The legal proceedings moved quickly once my parents realized they couldn't avoid consequences through denial or manipulation. They attempted to negotiate reduced penalties in exchange for voluntary restitution, but the evidence of their criminal behavior was too extensive for prosecutors to accept minimal consequences. David Kim reported that they'd agreed to return the full $185,000 from my house sale plus interest and penalties totaling an additional $50,000. They would also lose their business licenses, face criminal prosecution for fraud and exploitation of a deployed service member, and serve 2 years of supervised probation with restrictions on handling other people's finances. Thompson Tax Services closed permanently within 6 weeks as news of their criminal behavior spread throughout the community. Tyler found employment with a larger accounting firm where his technical skills and client relations experience were valued, but the family business that had been his career foundation was destroyed forever. The $235,000 recovery from my parents' restitution payment allowed me to purchase a better house in a different neighborhood where I could build new memories without constant reminders of their betrayal. Amanda Foster helped me invest the remaining funds in a diversified portfolio that would provide long-term wealth building and financial security. My parents' retirement accounts remained frozen for 8 months while courts determined appropriate distribution of assets for restitution and penalties. When the accounts were finally released, less than half of their original value remained after legal fees, penalties, and restitution payments. Their retirement dreams were destroyed by their own criminal choices. The personal relationships never recovered from the betrayal and its consequences. I maintained minimal contact with my parents, limited to necessary legal communications and occasional updates about their compliance with probation requirements. They had proven themselves capable of criminal behavior against their own son, and trust couldn't be rebuilt after such fundamental betrayal. Tyler and I maintained our relationship, but it was forever changed by the knowledge of what our parents had done and the consequences that followed. He understood that I'd had no choice but to pursue accountability for their crimes, but the destruction of our family was painful for everyone involved regardless of its necessity. 5 years later, I work as a cybersecurity consultant for military contractors, using the technical expertise developed during my Army service to protect critical defense systems from hostile intrusion. The career is professionally fulfilling and financially rewarding, providing exactly the kind of meaningful work I'd hoped to find through military service. The house I purchased with recovered funds has appreciated substantially and serves as the foundation for a real estate investment portfolio that generates passive income and long-term wealth building. Military financial planning principles continue to guide my investment decisions and spending priorities. My parents live in a small apartment in a retirement community that accepts residents with limited financial resources. Dad works part-time as a bookkeeper for a small business owner who either doesn't know about his criminal history or is willing to overlook it for cheap labor. Mom works retail jobs that provide supplemental income and basic health insurance. They never apologized for stealing my house or acknowledged that their actions were criminal rather than misguided financial management. To this day, they maintain that they were trying to help me and that my response was disproportionate to their mistake. The lack of genuine remorse confirms that pursuing accountability was the right choice regardless of its personal cost. Tyler built a successful career with his new employer and eventually started his own accounting practice that serves small businesses and individual clients. He learned from our parents' mistakes by maintaining strict ethical standards and never mixing client funds with business operations. His success validates that their criminal behavior was a choice rather than a business necessity. The experience taught me that family loyalty must be reciprocal and that trust requires ongoing verification rather than blind faith. Military service provides excellent preparation for recognizing deception, planning strategic responses, and executing complex operations under pressure. Those skills proved invaluable when dealing with criminal behavior by people I'd trusted completely. Sometimes people ask if I regret destroying my family relationships over money and property. The question misses the fundamental issue. My parents destroyed our relationships when they chose to steal from me while I was deployed overseas. I simply held them accountable for their criminal behavior and refused to pretend that theft was acceptable because it was committed by family members. The empty lot where my house used to stand is now occupied by a different family who had no role in my parents' criminal conspiracy. But the money from that theft, plus substantial penalties and interest,
allowed me to purchase better property and build a more secure financial foundation than I would have achieved without their forced intervention. Military training teaches that successful operations require clear objectives, strategic planning, and disciplined execution regardless of emotional pressures or relationship complications. My parents learned that lesson through the complete destruction of their retirement security and professional reputation. They stole my house while I was deployed, and they spent the rest of their lives paying for that decision. The house is gone, but justice was served completely and permanently. Sometimes that's the best outcome available when family members choose criminal behavior over honest communication about their problems. Military service taught me to face reality rather than hoping for outcomes that require other people to change their character. My parents never changed, but they learned that their choices had consequences they couldn't avoid or manipulate away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.